Good evening, everyone, or afternoon, depending on where it is that you're calling in from. This is Rachel Jensen here. I'm really excited to talk to you today about the opportunity to own a very in-demand hardwood and perhaps look at the residency options that come along with that. So we usually give people a minute or two to log in. Sometimes GoToWebinar has you reboot the system. So what we'll do in the meantime, and for those of you who are familiar with my webinars, you know we like to have you type into the question section of the control panel where it is you're calling in from. Find that question section on that control panel and type where it is that you're calling in from. We do like to read these out loud because every now and again we get folks who are sitting in the same town and perhaps didn't necessarily know that there was someone like-minded in the same area as them. So feel free to type that in. I'll read those out loud. That'll give people a moment to log in over here, and then we will get started. So question section of the control panel. So we have Sandy in Dallas, we have Mike in Phoenix, Trisha in New Mexico, James in Valrico, we have Peter from California, Joe in Bay St. Louis, Kirk is in Michigan, Jim, Casper, Wyoming, Eduardo is in Miami, Janet is in Charlotte, we have John O in Southern California, Dirk is in Fall City, Washington, Rebecca is in Kansas City, Missouri, we have Jeff in Weston, Florida, Delano, who's from Chicago. Dora's on the line. Awesome, Doris. Dora's from Vegas. We have New York. Southern Nevada is Jerry. We have John Purton in Tasmania. Awesome. We have Alian from the Netherlands. Parul in from Lexington. Leslie in from Peachland, British Columbia. We have a Panama City, Florida. That's Dawn. And another St. Augustine, Florida. And I see quite a few more over here. It looks like we have a pretty good Florida contingency today, which is always exciting. So a couple of things before we start. Number one, we are recording this webinar. You will get a recording of it in an email tonight after this presentation, so you can always reflect back on it. If you have any friends or family members who you think would benefit from this information, please feel free to share it with them as well. I know a few of you on the line, and you mentioned you've been trying to get your kids or grandkids to look at ownership of teak and maybe having a difficult time helping them to see. So feel free to send along this presentation as well. So that leads into my second point, which is you may want to take notes with a pen and paper. Otherwise, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, anything that pops up where perhaps you want a little bit more information about it or you'd like me to clarify it, just type those questions into that question section of the control panel where you typed your name in. And from there, we will make sure that they're covered at the end of the presentation. I expect that it'll be about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit longer because we do have a couple of guest speakers, but we will leave time at the end for questions and answers. So with that, we're going to get started. I'd like to thank everybody again for joining us this evening for our teak presentation. We're going to go through what teak is, why this opportunity is unique, and then of course some of the benefits of owning teak, which can lead to a residency. So what I like for people to think about when they come into presentations like this is really understanding what your goals are. What is it that you're looking to accomplish by participating in a program like this? And on the right-hand side, you'll have quite a few words on the screen, really answering some of the questions of why we have over 350 teak owners today and why it is that they decided to own teak with us. And everybody probably has different reasons for looking at this opportunity. For some of you, perhaps residency in another country, having that green card is a really important plan B. For some folks, they're looking at it from that legacy perspective, where this is a great investment or a great vehicle to pass on legacy or generational wealth stewardship, which you'll hear a few times throughout the presentation. A lot of folks also just like simply diversifying where it is that they have their investments and also diversifying their asset classes. So just depending on what you're looking for, you may find that some of these words on the screen here on the right-hand side align with what you're looking for, or perhaps there's something that's not on the screen, but you're looking for as well. And of course, that would be a great reason. So a little bit more about who we are. I mentioned to you earlier, my name is Rachel Jensen. I was working quite closely with Mike Cobb at the beginning of this Teak program specifically in Panama when we decided to offer it for individual investors. And I do have Mike on the line with us today. And Mike, why don't you give us a couple of words about why you planted Teak nearly 20 years ago. The Teak is going to be 20 years old in Panama, and then why you wanted to also plant another farm in Nicaragua, in another country. And again, Mike, very happy to have you here, and thanks so much for taking the time out to talk to our listeners.
Absolutely, happy to be here, and thank you for coordinating a great webinar. You produce a very informative webinar. It really covers just about everything that anyone would ever want to know about Teak, about the residency program. And actually, one of the things that I admire the most about you, Rachel, is you actually went through the residency program yourself. You became the guinea pig to test this thing out a few years ago when we first started it. And I think that speaks volumes about, you know, people can trust you and listen to what you're saying because you've walked the walk. And I think that's huge. So anyway, yeah, you know, gosh, I mean, 20 years, 20 years, 21 years ago when this first came up as an idea to a very small group of investors, there were 6 of us that had read an article written by Kathy Petticourt, and she was talking about reforestation incentives in Panama and Vietnam, in Teak in both cases. And so the 6 of us got on airplane, flew to Vietnam, and checked it out. And then I guess 4 of us came to Panama and checked it out there. And it was pretty easy to make the decision to work in Panama. Going to Vietnam was, two very long flights and 24 hours and 12-hour time difference and on and on and on. And Panama is, 3-4 hours depending on where you're flying from in the States, pretty much the same time zone. And so we picked Panama, and we found a farm, 100-acre farm, and it was a cattle pasture. Basically, it wasn't really a farm; it was a cattle pasture. And we hired, in fact, in the slide that you're looking at, that guy next to me, Jacobo Melamed, he was a young, kind of beginning engineer with Heo Forestal, because the thing that I think is important to understand is, I knew that I didn't understand this business at all. I'd gone to the Library of Congress. I'd spent a couple days down there researching as much as I could about teak and forestry, forestry principles of teak. But the more I read, the less I knew. And I knew that we needed to hire, professional management. And so we hired this company called Heo Forestal, and Jacobo at the time was, again, a young engineer, forestry engineer. And he is now the operations manager. Basically, he runs the entire Heo Forestal company, and they're a pretty big forestry company in Panama. The reason we picked them specifically was because they actually provided the seedlings to almost all of the other forestry companies in Panama at the time. They understood the genetics of how to get the best characteristics in the seeds and in the seedlings, and so we hired them to also not just provide the seedlings, obviously, but to manage the plantation. And for the last almost 20 years, that's exactly what they've done. When we set this up, Rachel, we set this up, as as an investment for ourselves. I mean, for the 6 of us, but largely for our kids and for our grandkids and for our great grandkids, because one of the nice things about timber, and I hear this at conferences. I speak at a lot of conferences, and a lot of them are all about cash flow, and people are talking about collecting a rent check every month or a paycheck every 2 weeks, or they're trading stocks or whatever, and all of that's important. I mean, I think we need what I would call fast cash flow. But the thing that I love about timber, and then teak specifically, is that it is a cash flow product. It just cash flows on a 25-year cycle, which is a generational cycle. I mean, generations are 20 to 25 years, and I like the generational cash flow element of teak because I'll get the first harvest of what we're not selling here in about 5-6 years, but we're going to replant it, and and maybe I'll be around in 35 years. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I don't think I'll make the next one 60 years from now. But those harvests are for the kids and for the grandkids, and it's about building a legacy that goes on long past your lifespan and into the lifespan of your heirs, and that's really what generational wealth stewardship is. It is for me, and it is for our investor group, and it is now for a couple 300 folks that have purchased teak parcels. People really understand that they're doing something for the kids, the grandkids, the great grandkids. They're leaving a legacy. They're building a legacy through timber. So very, very excited to be able to offer this opportunity. It was neat how it paired up with the Special Nations visa in Panama, and Rachel's going to talk more about that. And then the other thing we did, Rachel, you asked me to mention the baby teak. We had a lot of people buying teak that was 15, 16, 17 years old over the last 5 years, but a lot of people wanted the baby teak, and that's really where you get the generational wealth stewardship. I mean, you buy a parcel of baby teak at Grand Pacifica, and in 25 years you'll get a harvest. The really cool thing is that when you can get IRRs, internal rate of return, right around 10, 11, 12% compounding for 25 years, it doesn't get much better than that. And that's why we made this initial investment in the farm in Panama, and why today every year we plant more teak, because it really is a powerful way to create a lot of wealth with a small amount of investment, and let that internal rate of return, that compounding of return over 25 years really work for you in ways that I don't know of any other investment that does it this way. So anyway, that's why we did it, and we're happy we did it. And I probably said more than you wanted me to say, Rachel, but anyway, I got on a roll. Anyway, thank you for having me tonight, and I'm gonna listen. I'm gonna listen in if that's all right. I won't say anything unless you ask me to, but.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mike. We do appreciate your time and having us online with us. It's not every webinar where we're graced with your presence, so we do really appreciate that.
Yeah. I like how you said graced, but thank you.
And in addition, there is one more person I would like to introduce who's on the line with us, and you've probably seen her name at some point if you've sent inquiries to us, or if you perhaps are a teak owner already. This is Betsy Rosenlund. And Betsy, why don't you give us just a couple of words about what you do in your role, and then perhaps talk a little bit more about your plans for teak, perhaps ownership, and then residency.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Rachel said, my name is Betsy Rosenlund. I am the Director of Pre and Post Sales. So I see a lot of familiar names on here of folks who have inquired and folks who are owners with us. I work a lot with people who are in the beginning stages, when they're working on their paperwork and they're making the decisions to go through with it. And then afterwards, once you've made the decision to go through, and we're working on getting you your title, and also working on connecting you with the residency coordinator in Panama so that you can get started on that process. I am a teak owner myself. I have been down to our teak farm, a handful of times now, and every time I'll always learn something new about teak trees themselves or about our particular farm. So that's always a really fun thing to do. I do have plans to get my Panamanian residency in the next year or so. Just a matter of getting down there and really getting started on it. So I'm very excited to do that, and excited to learn to see it from firsthand perspective. So thanks again, Rachel, and looking forward to this webinar.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for being on today. We certainly appreciate your time, and looking forward to a great webinar ahead. So first off, I want to address something, and I don't know if it's on everyone's screen here, but you may notice a picture of the blue hole in the top left corner. Betsy mentioned she sees it on hers as well. I don't know how that got in there, but it may be on every slide, may not be on every slide. it's not a subliminal message to come visit us in Belize or anything along those lines, but if you do see it there in the top left corner, that's what it is. If you don't see it and think I'm absolutely crazy, well, it's on my screen. All right, so with that being said, we are going to talk about two opportunities during this presentation here. The first one is ownership of mature teak in Panama. This is 19-year-old teak, soon to be 20 years old, as Mike mentioned a little bit ago, and we're going to talk about what that ownership opportunity looks like. The second one is in Nicaragua, and this is newborn teak. We actually have teak in our second phase that has been planted already. We're planting the next batch, the next tranche in this second phase in the next couple of months coming up. So this really is newborn teak. This is the opportunity for you to get in at ground level. And if you're looking at this from that legacy perspective, well, it'll be great for you, your kids, your grandkids down the line, and really get in, as we talked about before, at that ground level. And we've had quite a few people who've messaged us in the past and said something like, oh, I wish I knew about your Panama farm when you guys were first starting out. So this is a way to get in as we're starting out there. So these numbers are solely based on projections. I do want to mention that of the current market. Cannot guarantee that these are the numbers that you're going to receive, but based on the research that we have done previously, based on what has been sold in today's market, and you'll find all of that information in the Belize resource white, or the Panama resource white paper, the Teak resource white paper, which we are going to email to you after this presentation here. So first, we're going to talk about why timber and why we decided to invest in timber 20 years ago. And Mike started to touch upon it during his part of the presentation, but one of the big reasons why he and the group of investors decided to invest in a 25-year-old hardwood was because they saw great numbers, great returns from this product. What we've also seen is that there's a big demand for timber. We're going to talk specifically about teak in this presentation and why teak is one of the most in-demand timbers. But we're also seeing generally is that the global supply is going down. And then one of the big reasons here, giving back to Mother Nature. And giving back to Mother Nature and the global supply being down kind of correlate. And what you can see here on the screen is that forests are falling at an alarming rate. And you can see it says there 85 acres are destroyed each minute. 85 acres of forest land are being destroyed each minute. Now, when you become an owner with us in the teak farm, we are committing to replanting. We replant, do it again, replant, do it again, replant, do it again. You are the owner of the teak land. It's titled in your name. And what you're committing to when you decide to become an owner with us is that we are going to reforest. Now, I don't have this written in the presentation anywhere, so if you want to just jot this down for your notes, it would be great. In Panama, there are really nice reforestation benefits for people who are invested in timberland that's a certified reforestation project, which ours is. So in Panama, you are exempt from income tax, Panamanian income tax in Panama on your harvest yield. You'll have to talk to your accountant or CPA in your home country to see what that looks like from your home country's tax perspective. But in Panama, you are exempt. In addition to that, you do not have property taxes on your property that's in certified reforested land. So two huge benefits. In Nicaragua, we were working with the government for quite a bit of time to have some sort of reforestation benefits, and we have received answers from them that they are willing to do a 50% tax exoneration at both the municipal level and then also the national level. So that's a really, really big deal, especially when they didn't have these sort of incentives previously for reforestation. So this is significant. Hope you're able to jot that down. If you have any specific questions about it, feel free to type that into the questions section of the control panel. What we're seeing is that the global demand for fine hardwood continues to increase, as you probably would guess, as the global population increases. This is not a big surprise for many of us. As more people are born, more people want true, authentic hardwood products. But what we're seeing, especially in the teak market, is that that supply is going down. Now, here's a great chart. I'd be happy to send this to you, but you'll also find it in that white paper that we're going to email you afterwards. Is that timberland investors have made 325% since 1987, beating the S&P by nearly 50% without that S&P's frightening volatility. And you might be a stock person, maybe you enjoy watching stocks and buying and selling, but even if you do enjoy that volatility, it is very important to have diversification. So this is always a topic people like looking at. They like understanding that there really is a demand for it and understanding how it is valued in the marketplace. Now here's a chart from the Eagle Daily Investor. This will also be in the information that's sent to you. Is in 1971, an initial investment of $10,000 was put into timber, and by 2010 it grew to about $1.5 million. Now, as you look at the left-hand side there on the screen in the year column, what you find is that it's over a pretty decently long period. Teak and ownership of timber is not one of those investment vehicles that you get into and then you're out tomorrow, or you're out next year, or you're out 5 years. Now you're always able to sell your land, but that's not the mentality of the over 350 people in our program who participated, and certainly not for the ultra wealthy who we're going to talk about who own timber as well. So do bear that in mind. You are able if you're able to just sit on it, let the teak literally grow in value each year, you're going to be doing very, very well. But as we see there on the screen, it's about a 15,000% gain from that initial $10,000 to about 1.5 million. Steve Sugarrood, some of you may be familiar with him. He's an economist who works pretty closely with Stansberry. And what he wrote is trees grow through recessions, they grow through wars, they grow through stock and real estate crashes. They grow through everything. They give you built-in investment growth that isn't guaranteed with a stock. So as you can see, he's quite bullish on ownership of timber. And I can tell you from 2008 to 2012, the trees continued to grow. Some of us probably know this time as one of the worst recessions in US history, but what we saw is that the teak continues to grow. And the really nice thing about teak is that it doesn't expire. It doesn't expire. So for example, if we didn't want to sell the teak between 2008 to 2012, maybe the market wasn't as great, then what we're able to do is literally just let the trees continue to grow in size, ultimately growing in value, and ending up with resulting in having more board feet when you take the trees to market. So this is very different from an agricultural product where if the fruit blossoms, you have to pick it and it expires. The trees just continue to grow. Now, for a really long time, ownership of timber has been reserved for the ultra wealthy, the top 1%. And there are a few examples there of who is already profiting from ownership of timber. See, John Malone, Ted Turner have over 2 million acres. One of the most interesting ones, I think, is the endowment funds, the university endowment funds. Northwestern, for example, has double-digit percentage of their portfolio in timber. And they're not the only ones you'll see in that resource guide, that there's Harvard, Yale, Duke. A lot of these big endowment funds allocate a percentage of their portfolio into ownership of timber. Again, more Forbes for 100 owners, and what you'll see, I mean, look at the price tag. Look how much money they have invested in timber. $240 million, $450 million, $400 million. These are not necessarily amounts that most of us can afford. It's not necessarily an amount that the average investor can put into one single investment. And I say that when I say average investor, I don't mean people who don't know how to trade stocks. I just mean people who aren't in that top 1% of the top 1%. But it's really exciting because we've been able to offer the opportunity for folks to earn and own timber and not necessarily have that $200-400 million price tag associated with it. Now, we go to many conferences. We talk about teak through webinars and through podcasts, and I know some of you have heard about us through that way, and you may recognize some of the people here on the screen, but it's really exciting to have over 350 people at this point between the Nicaragua farm and the Panama farm who've wanted to get in on the timber industry, but just simply didn't know how, didn't have the capital to put $200 million into a single investment. So if you are looking at teak perhaps for the first time, maybe this is your first time hearing from me, what we're able to also do is introduce you to some of our teak owners if you want to see what their experience has been with us so far. Now, teak specifically was chosen, and Mike talked about this a little bit before, but when the initial 6 investors came, because they realized that there was such a big demand for it. And that first bullet point there, it says teak is being harvested at a rate of 8 to 12 times the rate of replanting. I mean, that's significant. That's truly significant. And we're going to talk about what some of those rates look like. In addition to that, there's a global demand. We're going to talk about who's buying it. We talked about being green and responsible, and we'll also talk about the worth of it. So teak values have continued to increase. Plantation teak specifically, because there were logging bans in the 4 countries where teak is grown naturally. So what that resulted in is a lot of plantation teaks coming about. And actually, you'll find that plantation teak does tend to be more valuable than naturally grown teak, because it is planted and taken care of and harvested with the intention of selling the teak. So it tends to be much better quality. We talked about the Teak Exportation Ban just a moment ago, but these are the 4 countries where teak is grown naturally: India, Laos, Indonesia, and Myanmar. And these 4 countries have placed logging bans on the naturally growing teak. And that's just simply because there was such a demand for it that people were coming in, harvesting this naturally growing teak, not replanting, selling it. And ultimately what happened is there was just this deficit of teak within the country. So now they're at the point where they want to put more enforcement around making sure that it's done legally. Now, this is a really interesting point, and one that as a consumer you'd probably want to be interested in hearing. So who are the buyers of teak? Well, first, let's talk about the countries on the screen here that are projected to be the 2 most populous by 2100. It's probably no surprise to you that India and China are number 1 and number 2. They're also the 2 countries that are buying the largest quantities of teak at this point. We work with our forestry management company in Panama quite closely. And a few years ago, this was maybe about 3-4 years ago at this point, Jacobo and I went to some of the different management companies or the different harvesting companies who wanted to purchase this teak from us. And all of them were representing companies based in either India and China. India and China. So these 2 countries that are projected to be the 2 most populous by 2100 are also the 2 biggest consumers of teak. And in both of the countries, ownership of teak is seen as being wealthy, as a sign of wealth, because teak products are not inexpensive. We'll look at some of the price tags. In fact, they have quite a hefty price tag. When you own a teak product, you're really in that upper level. And in addition to that, not just owning teak products, but building with teak is also seen as a sign of wealth. So having teak floors, for example, in your house is something that the ultra wealthy really like doing because of the durability and the quality of it. And teak is not something that just started to appear in the marketplace. It's not one of those fads or one of those trends. It's been around for centuries. And some of the major reasons why it has been around for centuries and continues to be used is because of some of the reasons that you see here on the screen. So for example, it's exceptionally hard and durable. And because it is extremely hard and durable, it makes it a great wood to use outdoors. So you'll find a lot of fine furniture, outdoor patio sets, boats. A lot of the high-end boats are also made with teak. Here's an example on the left-hand side over here. So there's a real need for it, a real demand for it, and we're seeing that these high-end products are being built as a result. Chris Craft Boats, if we have any boaters in the room, if you've looked at teak boats before, you probably noticed that they're not inexpensive, but you can see this is from their website over here, Trademark Teak, we've mastered the art of woodworking. So I went to wayfair.com and typed teak into the search section of the search bar. And what I found are a handful of teak products that they sell in Wayfair. You can do this at any point if you want to as well, to really just get a good understanding of what teak products cost. Now, I may own teak trees. I don't necessarily have any teak products at this point, so wanted to really familiarize myself with the market. So here's an example, Adirondack chair and the footstool. So together, these 2 pieces, they started at $800 for one chair and one footstool set. That's unbelievable. And that's with 23% off. Now here's a teak shower mat. This is one that has 43 reviews, 5 stars. You can get it a little bit bigger for an additional $116. So it's not a product that I'd say most people are purchasing, but if you're in that top 1% or you're in that wealthier category, this may be a nice accompaniment to your bathroom. Now this one always gets me. This is a teak horse that's about $2,900. That's 24% off. And this one, if you have an empty corner in your house, it may be great in the corner there. But you can see that for a decorative horse, this is fairly expensive. Now, I had one guy, this was back in January, it was when we were in Argentina, and a couple of people on the Discovery tour with us, I was talking to them, and they listened to the teak webinars before, and they said, we really like your presentation, Rachel, but you had one thing wrong. I was like, oh my goodness, what could that be? And he said, the picture that you have is not a horse, it's a mule. Look at the ears. So it says, I continue to call it a teak horse because that's what it was on the website, but for those of you who are very familiar with horses and mules, you may see it as a mule. But you can go on Wayfair and look at those if you wanted to understand more of what teak prices look like. Now this one is actually, these are pictures from a fellow that I saw in February at one of the conferences we were at in Panama, and he owns a gate business in the Northeast. And what he does is installs high-end gates for people. So he told me that the gate here on the top right-hand side belongs to Anne Hathaway, and it's not uncommon for these gates, these teak gates, to start at about $65,000 US. That's just for one gate. So you can see that there's real value to it. These are pictures that he sent to me based on the work that he's done and has really complemented teak and the usage of teak in the outdoor woodworking world. Now, this was one we talked about, some of the super elite using teak for their flooring. This is one of the most expensive lofts in Tribeca, going for about $45 million in New York City, and it's just covered with teak floors. So they even boast about it on the listing where it talks about having wonderful teak floors. But again, you can see that it has value and it's used in a lot of this high-end construction. And if you own any property, perhaps in Central America, having some teak furniture outdoors is always a good idea. In addition to that, we talked a little bit about how long teak has been around and used in products. Here's an example of a chaise lounge chair that is from the Titanic. They found this chaise lounge chair at the bottom of the ocean, brought it back up, fixed it up a little bit, refurbish it, put it in a museum, and you're able to see it on display. Now, I don't know many other woods that would be able to withstand elements like that, but they were able to get this out from the Titanic, refurbish it, and you're able to see that again. So what you're seeing is that the teak is of remarkable quality and it's been around for decades. For teak to grow properly, it really has to be in the right climate. I don't really want to bore you all with this. You'll see it in the business plan, but specifically where we're located in Panama in the Darien province, and then of course at the Nicaragua Gran Pacifica property, it has the ideal location for growing teak. We've done soil samples to make sure that we're growing in the right locations, and they came back very, very favorable. So first we'll start off with Panama. Where we're located is in the Darien province. It's about a 3.5 hour bus ride or car ride from Panama City going out east. Now, if you're planning to go to the farm at any point, we do recommend that you go with one of us on either a tour or with our attorney, because it's very, very easy to miss it. And then you'll just keep going to the end of the Pan American Highway. But the Darien is one place in Panama that has some of the best soil and the best climate for agricultural and timber. So what we're finding is that a lot of people are looking at this region for their agricultural and timber farms, and the values of the land have gone up substantially over the past 20 years that we've been there. So this is a prime location. I'm going to assume that if you've been to Panama before, maybe not coming on one of our tours, you probably didn't get out to the Darien just because there's not too much out there. So this farm started in 1999. This month, the teak is turning 20 years old. This is the teak at age 1. It does grow pretty quickly. 2007, they need a dry season. Depending on what time of year you go, that the farm may be completely dry like you see in these pictures, or it may be wet, just depending on the climate. And that's exactly what we need, the dry season and a wet season for the teak to grow properly. In 2013, we started taking investors out to the farm to see their parcels, hug the trees, and this is when we initiated the program specifically in Panama. And our goal in mind at that point was to align it with the Friendly Nations visa, which Mike talked about a little bit ago. And we're going to talk more about what that program looks like. If you're interested in getting residency, it's not a requirement, but it is there if it's something that you're willing to consider. 2016, we were out there with a couple of investors. 2018, this was a really neat group. We had folks representing 5 or 6 different countries of all ages, as you can see there on the screen. So it was really neat to see that regardless of what generation folks were born in, they were understanding the value of owning teak. 2018, another picture from our tour. And how you benefit. So you own the land and you own the trees that are on the land. So it is titled to your name or to your company's name, however you want to set it up, but it is yours. You can, if you at any point you need to sell it, you are able to do that. You can come back through us, or you're able to put it online on some resale of timber agricultural lands, but that option is there in case you need to. In addition to that, we're only 6 years now, 5 years away until harvest. So it's going very, very quickly. It's one of those things that you also just don't have to think about. You let the management team take care of it. They make sure that the farm is cleaned properly, that the trees are trimmed properly, and you don't really have to do anything unless you want to come down and visit. And then, of course, we have the professional management team. And Mike showed this picture before of it of a Jacobo, and he works with Heo Forestal, been with us since the beginning, but he and his group, Heo Forestal, truly are the industry leaders for teak in Panama. They know everything about teak. They've grown teak for years. They've sold teak for years. So they really know about the industry that they are involved in. Now, if anybody's interested in seeing this, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to send it over to you. It's what we estimate the projections to look like. Again, no guarantees. These are just based on the market research that we have done at this point, but expecting each parcel to have about 21.5 trees at the end when we go to harvest in a few years, and then about 79,000 net would be the projected returns. So what a lot of people have done is paired up ownership of the teak parcel with this asset protection bundle, which includes residency, it includes a corporation in Panama, and includes the opening of a bank account. We set you up with a residency coordinator. She's phenomenal. She speaks fluent English. She has processed many residencies for us and really makes the process as smooth as possible. So if that's something that you're interested in, you're able to do that. If you have a spouse or you have your parents who want to apply for residency, kids up to 18 or 18 to 25, if they're enrolled in college, they can be your dependent. You can add them for an additional $1,900. One point I do want to make as well is that we accept Bitcoin. There is a volatility premium associated with it because of the fluctuations with regards to the value of Bitcoin. We can talk about that offline if you're interested in it, but it does give you the option to own through the sale of your Bitcoin. So a great way to unload it if you're looking for something to do with your crypto. So you get the asset protection bundle, you get the mature teak, and it's only about $27,000. The Friendly Nations visa is open to citizens of about 50 countries that Panama has deemed friendly. So not every country is on this list. If your country is not on the list, then unfortunately you're not going to be able to get the residency. You can still own the teak, but can't apply for the Friendly Nations visa. But if you are from a country that's listed on the Friendly Nations list, then some of these benefits here are very advantageous, such as you only have to visit 1 day every 2 years to maintain your residency. 1 day every 2 years. A majority of countries usually require that you spend at least 6 months in the country that you're becoming a resident of so that you become a tax-paying resident. This is huge. This is really huge. If you're not ready to move anywhere yet permanently, or you're still trying to figure out where you want to be, get the Friendly Nations visa in Panama, put it in your back pocket, keep exploring, keep finding places that perhaps you may want to call home, and at least keep this one in your back pocket to have if you ever want to pull it out. This is a great way to prepare for your plan B. In addition to that, it's permanent. So once you have it for life. You don't need to keep reapplying. I know a lot of countries require that after 5 years you reapply, after 5 years you reapply, and you continue on with that. You don't need to do that with this. And in addition to that, it can lead to citizenship if having a passport is your primary goal. And do note that residencies and citizenships are very different. Residency, think of it as a green card. With a citizenship, you get a passport to that country. So if you're looking for a path to a passport that's not going to cost you $500,000, then you'll take the time element. And after 5 years of having your permanent residency in Panama, you can apply for your citizenship. So I'm happy to go through the residency timeline with people more specifically once we talk about your situation. You are going to be required to visit Panama. A lot of people combine the trips where it says trip 1 and 2 of opening a bank account and registering with immigration. That can also be done in 2 trips if you're not able to be in Panama for a total of 10 to 12 business days. Then about 4 to 6 months later, you'll be approved. Annette will get in touch with you and you will plan your time down to the country to pick up your residency card. I'm going to reiterate this one more time. You do need to personally go to Panama to become a resident of the country. Having a POA doesn't work. So if residency is a consideration for you, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, it doesn't have to be next year, but just understand that you do need to have this time in country in order to complete the process. And while you're there, there are many, many things to do. It's very geographically diverse. Eric, I know you're on the webinar with us. He just spent a couple of weeks in Panama, and he went to Baru volcano. He hiked it up. He said it was very exhausting afterwards, but he was able to have a view of both the Atlantic and the Pacific waters from the top of the volcano, which is awesome. If you're looking for something to do, I'll send along that website he sent, the tour guide, and you're able to book a trip. But a lot of things to do. If you're not really a hiker, awesome beaches. If you like to shop, Panama City is very metropolitan and has quite a few different malls for you to visit. So that ends our Panama part of the presentation. That's the first opportunity that we're going to talk about during this presentation. The second one is the newborn teak that we have in Nicaragua. And this really started as a result of a lot of our owners in Panama saying, we love the idea, we love the concept, we wish we got in ground level with you in Panama. We're looking for something for us long term, or our kids or our grandkids, and are you going to start another farm? So we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked all over the place, and ultimately right in our backyard, we ended up having quite a bit of land for our second phase. And this is in Nicaragua. It's at Gran Pacifica. We've had property there for over 20 years. And we feel very comfortable there in the country. We've been doing business there for 2 decades at this point. You know, I understand there's some a political situation that maybe not everybody is up to date on, but we still continue to operate our business there. We find it to be a wonderful location for investors, especially investors who are thinking about appreciation, investors who are looking to get in at entry levels. Nicaragua truly is an incredible place for that right now. So I do want to talk about this one because this farm is a really great opportunity for people who want to maybe start small, or maybe they have a few kids and grandkids where they want to gift them each a parcel and the $22,000 doesn't really work for them, or work for you. This is a really great, easy, and inexpensive way to get in on a few parcels. So the first phase did sell out. We had 15 hectares there. Those trees are 3 at this point. So after age 3, teak becomes resistant to fire, rot, termites, bugs, anything that you may have considered to be a risk. During those first 3 years, what we end up doing is taking extra precautions with firewalls and whatnot, pesticides, to make sure that we are making sure the teak is growing properly. So that phase is sold out. We had a lot of people who've continued to show interest in teak. So of course, having another phase made sense in order to serve our clients. So what we did in Nicaragua was surveyed smaller parcels. And the parcels are about 1/4 of an acre. What you see on the screen there at 0.75, we have a 3-parcel bundle, which we're going to talk about in the presentation, but a 3-parcel bundle for less than $21,000. And you're able to individually title each of those 3 parcels. So if you have 3 kids or 3 grandkids, or you want to gift one to your sibling, or whatever the case may be, you're certainly able to do so. So it's an initial investment of less than $21,000. And from there you get the 0.75 acres. This was from our first phase. We have a on-site nursery. We have an on-site team whose only job and full responsibility is to make sure the trees are growing properly. So we did have them as seedlings. Once they become saplings, then we plant them, and they continue to grow. Here's a picture of Eric. I know he's on the line. Eric, I'm sorry I didn't get your new picture, and Eric was just in Nicaragua with us last week, and he sent me a picture of him at the farm with the 3-year-old trees. And this is when they were young. This is when they were probably about 6-7 months here. And I'll incorporate that for the next one. It was a really great picture to see how over about 2.5 years the trees just continue to grow. So we invite you to come out, of course, see the trees, learn a little bit more about the country firsthand. It's always important to do that instead of just going off of what the media says. I'm happy to talk to you all about the country and what's going on if you're curious there. But here's an example of the net projections. And again, this is based on the current market and is not guaranteed. But this down here represents what we expect from each 1/4 acre parcel. And then, of course, when you times that by 3 to get the 3 parcels, it comes out to about $304,000 over that 25-year period. Now, something that I want to talk about is that you don't have to wait the full 25 years to start to see money coming back to you. So age 25 is when we have the big harvest. That's when the trees are nice size. There's the best time value of money at age 25. But in between that 25-year period, there's something that we do called thinnings. And that's when we remove the trees that aren't growing so well. And that's to be expected because we overcrowd, we overplant in the beginning, understanding that we're going to be thinning. This is very, very important. This whole process is very important, which is why we have a professional team doing this. They understand the numbers, they understand the algorithms, everything that they need in order to produce a healthy farm. So during that time at age 12, 18, and 20, there are what we call thinning periods. You receive the proceeds from that, and if you are looking for, excuse me, and if you're looking for the specific numbers, I'm happy to send that to you in the business plan. Now, how you benefit, very similar to Panama, is you own the land and you own the trees. In Nicaragua specifically, not in Panama, in Nicaragua, you're able to use a trust. You're also able to use a self-directed IRA custodian, neither of which you can do in Panama, but you are able to own the land and the trees through your trust and through your self-directed IRA custodian. That's a great way to pass on tax-free generational wealth, at least from the self-directed IRA way of doing it. We talked about the thinning proceeds, and we talked a bit about the professional management team. And then what do? You leave it for your kids and your grandkids, and you leave it as a timeless legacy for them. Now, I don't know about you all, but here's a picture of my parents on the screen who thought that I was absolutely bonkers when moving to Nicaragua 7 years ago and eventually talking to them about teak, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They grew up in New York. All they knew was the stock and bonds. And finally got them down to Panama. They are, in fact, Panama teak owners at this point, but they thought I was absolutely crazy. And eventually they did come around to it. And you probably have something similar if you talk to your neighbors or your friends who think, you're thinking about doing what in Panama? Who are these people? And you'll tend to get that, but we're happy to share with them. You can always share with them this webinar, and they can learn a little bit more about what you're doing so that they don't think it's too crazy. So a couple of the recaps. Number one is the generational wealth stewardship is a tremendous way to pass on that wealth, to leave a legacy for your heirs. If you don't have any kids or grandkids that you want to pass this down to, there have been a couple of folks who have decided to put it in a foundation in the name of the foundation, then it'll get passed on to the foundation when they pass. In addition to that, this is pretty important for people who are looking at investments, is that it's a real tangible asset. And that means you're able to go to the farm at any point, as you saw Eric did, see the trees, hug the trees, stomp on the dirt, but you know that it's there and it's literally just growing. In Nicaragua, you're able to use your self-directed IRA. In Panama, if you want to use that self-directed IRA, there's another step. It adds a little bit more steps to the process. I'm happy to go through that with you, but usually people use their personal name or a corporation. And in addition to that, if you're looking at residency, this is a great way to do it. In Nicaragua, if you invest more than $30,000 into the Teak, you're able to get residency. To be honest, it hasn't been very popular because you do need to spend 6 months out of the year to fulfill your residency requirements. So if anybody has looked at Nicaragua and is seriously considering moving there, then residency may be an option for you. But in the meantime, there's an option there in case you change your mind. For those of you who are in real estate, you've probably seen something similar before. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. We have one field trip coming up in Nicaragua. It's December 6th to the 8th. I invite those of you who maybe are invested with us in Nicaragua already, or perhaps you're considering Nicaragua, you want to see what it's all about. Maybe you don't necessarily want to go on your own. This is a really great way to do it. We're working on the agenda right now and pricing, but if you're interested, just send me an email. You can reply to the email that I sent you, inviting you to the webinar or reminding you about the webinar, and we'll get those details to you. We don't have one planned for Panama at this point because we are pretty much sold out. For this webinar specifically, we've released 8 more parcels. So it was 10. I had a couple of people complete reservation forms over the past couple of days. So we're down to 8 last parcels in the Panama farm. So didn't necessarily plan a trip for that. We are looking at more land in Panama, but nothing has been concrete yet, so can't really give you a timeline there. But December 6th through 8th in Nicaragua. Now, I'm going to email you these complimentary resources a little bit after we get off the line here. One of them is the Panama Handbook. The other is a Teak resource guide. I referenced the Teak resource guide a few times throughout the presentation. These are great ways for you to get more familiar with the countries, to get more familiar with the concept of Teak and the marketplace for Teak. It really delves into that a lot more in depth than what we did during this presentation. So no need to email me for those. They are going to come to you electronically. All you have to do is click the links and it'll pop up there on your screen. Now we talked about this a little bit before, but the Panama Teak is turning 20 years old this month. So we are going to be increasing the price in 7 days to $23,800 plus residency fees if you do want to apply for residency. So I do want to let you know this. You're kind enough to be on the webinar with me tonight. For those of you who've been following us for a while and been teetering, maybe this is a good time if you're looking for that savings. For those of you who are newer and are still exploring the opportunity, I certainly invite you to send us an email there, schedule a time to chat. Of course, you can re-listen to this webinar, but we want to make sure that everybody has been made aware of this birthday party. So I mentioned to you that we have 8 parcels left at this point in Panama. We were initially sold out, but our initial investors were kind enough to open a couple more for this presentation. And then from there, eventually we will have the new farm in Panama if anybody misses out on this Teak opportunity here. Now, in addition to that, in Nicaragua, we have the 3 parcel bundle. This is the one we talked about, 3/4 of an acre, initially going for about $21,000. And we're offering you $740 off if this is something that you would like to do. Mark, I don't know if you're on the line. We talked about doing something like this for each of his kids. Each kid gets one of the parcels, and from there, titled in their name, keep it easy peasy. There's not much that they have to do in order to make sure it's continuing to grow. That's all handled by the management team. So really great ways to pair up some of the programs here and look at your opportunities. I mentioned this before, but we do accept Bitcoin for the parcel and for residency fees. So this is something for you to consider if you're looking to unload that Bitcoin. Now, with that, that's the end of my formal presentation. I know I speak very, very quickly, and we had a lot of information to cover. So if there's anything that you want more clarification on, send the question there in the control panel, in the question section of the control panel. I'll read those out loud, get those answered for you, and then from there, we'll call it a night. But what I wanted to do first, Dora sent me an email just a little bit of time ago, and she was asking about payment plans. And she said, do you need to pay upfront for everything, or can you do some sort of staggered payment plan? We certainly can. In Panama, we do a $5,000 deposit that holds your parcel, and then over a 3 to 4 month period, you pay off that balance. Now, I do want to mention that if you're planning to go through residency, you cannot apply for residency until we've received 100% of your funds. And then that's when we also get started on the power of attorney and then titling that parcel over to you. That happens once we receive payment. So there is a payment plan about up to 4 months. We typically don't do longer than that, 0% interest, but it gives you the chance to pay for it in chunks. Residency though, residency and the asset protection bundle, that does need to be paid in full, and you wouldn't really be paying for that until after your parcel is paid off, but you can't do any sort of payment plan for that because those funds go directly to the attorney and she gets started as soon as possible and needs those funds to get started. So just a heads up there. In Nicaragua, we do have a payment plan as well. For this specific one, it is the same $5,000 down, and this one is 2.9% interest, and the balance could be paid over a 12-month period. But again, very, very feasible, I think, especially if you're typically used to having payment plans $5,000 down over a 12-month period. It's about 2.9% interest. So just something to consider there. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Teak titling. I know we have a couple owners on the line, and I want to make sure that folks understand this as they're going through the power of attorney process. Panama takes a long time to process titles. After you become an owner with us, meaning after we receive the paperwork from you, after funds are received, what we do is we send you a power of attorney that you need to get apostilled. And I'm not going to go into the details now. I could easily do a presentation on this that's 15, 20 minutes, but don't want to bore you all. So we will send you the paperwork for the power of attorney. You send that down to Panama to the titling attorney, Marcos, who's down there, and it can take a long time. I would say 18, 24 months, 30 months is probably about normal. That's okay. That's to be expected. I know, especially for a lot of the North Americans on the line who are used to having titles in a month, 30, 60, 90 days, it might make us a little uneasy at first, but this is just the standard process in Panama. There's always a backlog. There's always holidays that are going on. And just bear that in mind as you're going through that titling process. We do send our owners quarterly updates so you have an idea of what's going on. And so you're able to see the progress as it's happening. But you do need that power of attorney signed. Otherwise, we cannot process titles for you. So wanted to make sure that that was mentioned during the presentation here. All right. Thank you, Mikkel, for joining us. Mikkel, some of you may recognize his name if you come from the Expat Money Show. But Mikkel, glad you were able to join us. All right, Sandra said, are you suggesting that one cannot use a self-directed IRA in Panama? And I do want to clarify this because I understand how I could have confused folks. In Panama, you cannot use, your title cannot be parceled in the name of your self-directed IRA custodian or a trust. So what people have done is their self-directed IRA custodian owns an LLC. It can be a Wyoming or Delaware or wherever you want to incorporate that LLC. That LLC that's owned by the self-directed IRA custodian can only own investments that are made through your self-directed IRA. You can't decide that you want to put a rental property in Memphis that you paid for out of your own pocket or property lease, whatever. It only can be for your IRA, your self-directed IRA. So if you have this LLC that's owned by your self-directed IRA custodian, you are able to go through the process of owning Teak in Panama. But you cannot use a trust. They just don't recognize trusts as legal entities to own titles. Thank you, Sandra, for asking about that. I know it was a little confusing earlier. All right, another one here. This is a great question. What is the cost to replant the land after harvesting? Is that taken into account for the purchase pricing numbers? Really great question, Susan. We expect in Panama that it'll be about $300, $350 per parcel per quarter acre. It'll be a little bit less than that in Nicaragua. I can't guarantee what that number is going to be because who knows what the price of teak is going to be at that point for a sapling. We do have estimates. You'll see that in the comparison chart that I'll send to you after this email. But what happens is after the harvest, then we get with our management team. We let you know how much it is per parcel. And then from there, you can either take that out of your teak proceeds or pay anew, however it is that you want to do that. So we can't guarantee that. I can't add that into the purchase price because I'm just not too sure what that is going to be at this point. All right, so this is another good question. How are the management and maintenance fees paid from the owner monthly or taken out when harvested? Great question, and I'm gonna answer this in two parts. I'm gonna answer the question first, and then I'm gonna divert a little bit. So you pay it on an annual basis, and typically what folks have tend to do is just give us their credit card to put on file. We let them know on an annual basis when we're going to be processing that. We process, they get a receipt, done. But that is done on an annual basis. And the reason that it's done like that is because each year we have to clean the farms. We have to make sure that the trees are trimmed properly and there's work that goes into maintaining a teak farm to make sure that it is well looked after. So in Nicaragua, the 1/4 acre parcels, the annual fees for that are about $125. And that also includes property tax because there's not an exoneration of property tax in Nicaragua, but it's about $125 a year. Now, in Panama, at this point, in this first harvest, there aren't any annual fees, and that's because the agreement previously was that the management team receives the thinning proceeds. So in lieu of you getting the thinning proceeds, you don't pay any annual management fees. So that is going to change after this upcoming harvest. Again, you'll see all of this in our marketing and brochures, so you'll be fully aware. I can't guarantee what that number is going to be. It'd probably be something similar to Nicaragua, but again, that'll just depend on the cost of labor in these countries over the next few years. All right, good question, Jeffrey. This is one that I would definitely recommend talking to your CPA or accountant about because I am neither of those. But he said, what about foreign corporation reporting? If you are a U.S. citizen, I don't know about the other countries, but if you are a U.S. citizen, you most definitely need to make sure that you are reporting your foreign corporation. I personally don't remember the number of that form off the top of my head, but your accountant or CPA should. And all you really need to do is report it. If it holds any assets, then what's included in that, but that is your duty to do as a U.S. citizen. Question here from Jeffrey, do you need to own a Panama corporation or can a U.S. corporation own the land? A U.S. corporation can own the land. The Panama corporation, you'll end up opening one with residency if you decide to do residency, but what some folks have also done is use the Panama corporation that they've created during that residency process, which will own the parcel. And that's one of the best things to do for estate planning down the line, but totally up to you and how you want to set that up. Do the parcels, this is from Susan, do all the parcels already sold and for sale have roughly equivalent number and quality of trees? The answer to that is yes. It's all roughly the same. There may be a parcel that has a tree or two less or a tree or two more, but more or less they are indeed all of the same. Here is another question here from Delano. Can a Panama corporation own land in Nicaragua? Yes, you are able to use that Panama corporation to own land in Nicaragua. I'm seeing a lot more questions come in, and I'm seeing a lot of questions about taxes. And I don't want to speak about that too specifically because everybody's in a different country. What I would recommend is just talking to your CPA or your accountant or lawyer, just understanding what your tax obligations would be for ownership of land in another country that's producing income for you. So with that, I know we're a little bit past the hour here. You'll be getting an email from me with those documents that I mentioned earlier, the Teak Resource Guide and the Panama Handbook. If this is something that you're interested in, there will also be a reservation form in that email. I know for some of you this is very new, and I don't necessarily want to make it seem like we're telling you to do this now, but it is a great opportunity since the Teak is turning 20 at this point. Also, if this is new or if there are any other questions that are perhaps on your mind that we didn't have the chance to cover, or maybe you just didn't think about it during the presentation, feel free to email me. Betsy and I will be in touch, Angela, to go through your questions and to make sure that you feel comfortable with the information. So with that, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody. I really appreciate you joining us on this webinar. This is one of my favorite topics. As Mike talked about, I am a resident of Panama. I do own trees at the farm, very passionate about it, believe in it 110%, and look forward to having you join the Teak family if it makes sense for you. Alrighty, everybody, have a really great evening or afternoon, wherever in the world you may be, and we'll chat soon. Bye-bye.